All right, we're live. All right, and hopefully my microphone is louder now. Cause I've had a couple requests to add a compressor. I've done it. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. But yeah, let's get right in. All right, hustles. Oh, we already got some comments. Hustle sound. Wow, do we have a Discord room? Good question. I have a Discord channel at Tabletop Composer or something like that. It's not very active. I have people on there, but there's not really a lot of posts and such. But yeah, that's something on my to-do list is to be a bit more active on there. You're welcome to join if you can find it. I don't have the link on me at the moment, but yeah. Awesome. So that's right. Let's get to work. Here we have the lesson plan and notes. This is, as usual, downloadable in the description of this stream, or if you're visiting afterwards, in the video. Description, you'll have a link. It says lesson plan and notes. That is everything here. It's a summary of everything we'll talk about. And if you are signed up for the IFMC newsletter, they've been sending these out to everybody as well. A bit small, the loudness. Do you mean that I'm too loud? Am I too quiet still? What's going on? Hopefully you can still hear it. Let's see here. But yes, so lesson goals today, we are kind of build on what we did in the last lesson. Last lesson was kind of like a break from the typical stuff that we've been doing and more of kind of like a music theory crash course, talking about strategies for writing melodies and writing chord progressions. It's too quiet. Oh no. Can people hear me? Let's see here. Are people struggling to hear me? It says my audio input is coming at minus 4.7 decibels, which is about as loud as I can get without clipping. Maybe it's on your end? I'm not sure. But if people can hear me, hopefully that's a good thing. If not, leave comments below. Let me know what you think about the sound quality and any other recommendations you have for how I can improve the stream. But for now, let's dive right in. We've got, so today, that's right, we're going to kind of build off. Last lesson was a little bit of music theory, a bit of departure from the film scoring kind of things. We talked about the two elements of a strong chord progression and how to create an effective chord progression. You basically just need two things. You need a nice cadence and you need to form a pattern. Then we learned how if you use a chord progression first, you can find target tones to build your melody. And I demonstrated how to write a melody. It was kind of a cheesy little thing, nothing too special. But since then, actually this morning even, I took some time and wrote out my actual theme for the piñata. And then a little idea that I have for the little girl. But today we're going to move forward. We're going to talk about some strategies for creating sound palettes and what those are, as well as we're finally going to get into spotting. Spotting is the last step before we start actually composing all of the music scene by scene. Spotting is where we're going to get all the information we need to figure out the tempo mapping and the hit points, etc. that each scene has that our music needs to hit. So, with that, let's kind of take a look at the things that I came up with. So here we have my initial melody, which followed the description that I came up with. If you remember in lesson, I think it was 2, we talked about the 9 parameters approach to planning themes and such. And so I kind of came up with this melody based off the description. It's just a simple bare bones piano sketch. So that's the basic idea. Then after that, I had a bunch of research I had done on kind of mariachi music and the kind of sound I wanted to create. I have a very specific sound in my mind. My tío Mata my uncle Mata has an annual birthday party, and there's always a mariachi playing there. So I've got these kind of memories of going to these parties and hearing this music, and I want to kind of create a bit of that in my sound. So to do that, a couple of things I did. I created a bit more of a dynamic bass line, something that moves a little bit more. I gave a slightly more rhythmic feel to my chords, nice and short, something to be played by guitar. I'll probably record myself playing these chords instead of just using a sound library. And then my melody, I harmonized in thirds, meaning I had my primary melody, then I dropped the voice a third below, making sure that it stayed within my key, with a few changes here and there, sometimes like a repeated note instead of doing a third, to help make sure that I didn't have any clashing harmonies. And so this is kind of like the final product of my sketch. And so that's my main melody for the piñata. I'm going to have to change that quite a bit. I'm going to have to arrange it. I'm going to have to find different emotional settings for that. And we're going to find out what it needs to do today. With the spotting process, we're going to figure out exactly what this theme needs to evolve into, what it needs to accomplish, how I need to change it. I already know that I want a very kind of quiet folk kind of version of this in the background for kind of like the opening scene in the just kind of the tired, sleepy, abandoned store. And then I also need to create on the opposite end a big heroic version for the piñata's final escape. Now, when I do this, I typically, while I come up with my primary theme, I'll also do a couple different variations. So here I have a half variation, which I mentioned this, I believe, in the last lesson, where I do a full-length theme, typically about 8 measures long. I will do one that's half as long to make sure it kind of works at 4 measures long. That way I can have for moments where the full-length theme can be worked in moments where I have time to demonstrate the entire idea. Sorry, that was bothering me. But the shorter ones can be used in kind of more strategic moments where I don't have time for the full theme, but I can still get the kind of basic idea. And then the shortest, which is typically just a very brief 1 or 2 measure at the longest, kind of hint at the theme. Something where it's not the entire theme. It's not even necessarily the full motif. It's just something I can use to hint at my themes throughout the film. So for the piñata, I came up with this one for my very shortest one. And kind of that one that I did. It doesn't need to be this direct arrangement, but that's going to be my short motif that I can use. Then, for the little girl, I decided that I wanted something much shorter, something a lot more fragmented and rhythmic, something that can be used in more of like a horror type setting. So I thought if I can do this over a single chord, that'll give me a lot of freedom, because if it's over a minor chord, anytime there's a minor chord, I can create some variation of it. So I knew I wanted it to be some kind of arpeggio, some sort of short little idea, and so what I came up with was this. Oops. I'm sorry, that was a C major chord. All right, sorry. I will demonstrate over and over again that I am not a very competent piano player. But that's my main little idea, and I wrote that because I know I want it to be kind of horrific. Like, I want it to be short. I want it to be a little kind of a horror little vibe. I want it to be dramatic. And I can change it. If I go down an octave, it gets a little gloomier. Again, a little mess up there. But the most important thing is I can also, by just changing it into a major chord and making it a little more legato, go from this kind of dark motif into a much more kind of a love and happy motif. Oops. Kind of lighter, friendlier at the very beginning when we don't know what a crazy psychopath the little girl is. So these are the thematic ideas that I came up with this morning and what I will be using for this film score. Now you'll notice it's not a lot. I really don't have a lot to work with, and that's okay because all I want are my basic ideas. These are like the smallest little themes I can work with. I haven't orchestrated anything. I haven't finalized anything. All I know is that as we start to spot the scenes today, I'll be able to use these ideas to kind of imagine how the music is going to flow and ebb throughout the story. All right, any questions so far? Annabelle, yes, Cubase. I'm a huge Cubase fan. Why? Because it's the one I started with. I honestly, when I first started, I didn't even know what a DAW was, which is pretty common. And when I found out that I needed a DAW to write music, I just Googled what DAW does Hans Zimmer use. Found out he uses Cubase, and so that's the one I got. Since then, I have worked with Cubase, I've worked with Pro Tools, I've worked with Ableton, Logic, I've worked with all kinds of things, but Cubase is by far my favorite. This one is a little outdated. I have Cubase 9.5 Pro. I keep putting off updating it, but it works. I'm not running into any issues, but and welcome, Darlene, welcome. We're getting some more people showing up. Wonderful. So, today, what we're going to focus on is, like I said, the next step. So the last thing I want to talk about in kind of this pre-planning thing is something called a sound palette. Now, the sound palettes, if you're following along with kind of the lesson plan below, they're basically just the instruments you choose to work with. All right, so if you think about it like a painter, all right, so a painter, they have their palette, and before they start painting, I'm not a painter, so maybe I'm making this up, but a painter chooses their colors ahead of time. All right, they've done their sketch, it's time to start painting it. They know what colors they need, they know which colors they can mix together, they know what they're working with. It's the same with a composer or orchestrator. When you're approaching a project, it can be very, what's the word I'm looking for? Debilitating. It can be very debilitating to just have countless options available. If you're one of those people with a massive library of sound libraries, a massive collection, it can be a little bit debilitating deciding which ones you want to use. If you have 10 libraries for violins, which one are you going to use and when? So the idea of kind of creating and selecting which sounds you want to work with becomes very important. And the cool thing is if you're deliberate with it, you can start using it as a way to kind of tell your story. And lots of films and soundtracks go on to be kind of idiomatic with certain sounds. Like Interstellar is very famous for its use of the pipe organ. Going off with Hans Zimmer again, the idea of his Inception, that movie, that soundtrack would not be the same without the huge Brahms that go underneath. There are all these kind of sounds that you can create to help tell your story. The instruments, you can use a specific instrument to portray a specific character. I've done that before. In fact, in a previous class I did on film scoring playlist, I used the clarinet to portray one character and a flute to portray another. And their themes were always played by those instruments. Or when their themes weren't being used, I could still hint at them using those instruments. You can also use specific styles to portray specific regions, locations, or even time periods. Kind of like what we're doing with this one, or what I'm doing with this one by using mariachi instruments. And there's all kinds of ways that you can work with it, but one of my favorite strategies for using a sound palette is to not just create an initial sound, but to be very deliberate with the way you develop that initial sound. One of my favorite examples of this being used is Raya and the Last Dragon. James Newton Howard did the soundtrack for that movie. I don't remember a lot about the movie. I remember seeing it thinking, oh, yeah, that's good, but the soundtrack blew me away. And at the core of the soundtrack is a single sound palette, which is a collection of instruments that are native to Southeast Asia. And James Newton Howard used these instruments to kind of create the sonic world of the story. Now, that was sound palette number 1. Sound palette number 2 for the movie was a more traditional orchestra, and it was usually layered with the first sound palette. And that was used very strategically. The idea for that sound palette was anytime the emotions were particularly strong, or he needed a little extra weight to his sound, he would use the traditional orchestra, which has the benefit of nearly 100 years worth of use in movies to kind of give it that extra weight and presence that he needed. Then sound palette number 3 was a very specific use, which was a very powerful female vocalist. I'm unfortunately blanking on her name at the moment. But her voice was used anytime a very specific theme or idea from the story would come up, which was the idea of the indomitable spirit of the people in that story world. And so anytime that theme, that these people cannot be broken, they can't be taken down, anytime that kind of pops up in the movie, we would hear this singer in the soundtrack. So just kind of a masterful way. Like you have your core sound, which was kind of that Southeast Asian instrumental group. Then anytime you needed to add intensity, size, or emotion, you just layered it with a more traditional orchestra. And then every time a very specific thematic idea was introduced in the story, he would use the female vocalist. And it's kind of this masterful way of thinking about not only what instruments can you use, but how will you use them? And there's a lot of kind of things that you can come up with. By this point in the process, this is lesson number 4. We've talked about the story quite a bit. So you'll probably have an idea of what kind of instruments you want to work with. Sometimes those instruments are actually picked for you. Many competitions that want to have your music performed live will give you a list of the instruments available to you, so you won't really get to choose too much. But in the moments where you do get to really kind of think, and maybe ideas aren't coming to you, there are a couple questions that I like to use. And these actually aren't my questions. These come from a book called Contemporary Film Scoring Techniques, is what I believe it's called. It's by Ben Newhouse. In fact, I'm going to write his name on here. All right, Ben Newhouse is a brilliant composer and even more brilliant teacher. And his book, Contemporary Film Scoring Strategies, is what I think it's called. It's on my bookshelf behind me. Fantastic book, really awesome, cool kind of information on spotting and stuff. Grab it if you haven't, if you've got the budget and you're interested in reading a really good book. But these questions that he includes are kind of very useful to kind of taking the guesswork out of it if you're really struggling. And the first one is kind of obvious, which is what are the geographical locations of your scene or your story? Are there styles associated with it? And it's kind of the pattern. It's a question, and then are there styles associated with it? So what time period are you in? What musical styles are associated with it? Then the other one is what projects are similar to yours. So for ours, this is an animated short film. Kind of goofy little black comedy kind of thing. Dark humor. So that's a very kind of specific genre. Animated, dark comedy. What kind of music gets used in other films like that? Maybe you can take inspiration from that. Do you want to take inspiration from that? Then sometimes your studio or network, if you're working with a studio network, has a specific sound. Netflix tends to have a specific sound. HBO Max tends to have a specific sound. In terms of, do they want the big orchestra or do they want to push the envelope kind of thing? Then target demographics, kind of budget you're working with, and then really any other kind of special considerations. At this point of the process, I already have a pretty decent idea of my own sound palettes, and these are my notes. I have 2 sound palettes that I want to work with. All right? I want my primary sound palette to be kind of like a smallish mariachi band. All right? Like I said, I have a very specific sound in my mind from my memories and my kind of family experiences. I want to kind of create this type of sound. For me, that means guitar, guitarrón, 2 violins, and 2 trumpets. Those are the ones that I know I can work with. I have a guitar. I can play simple chords. I can record myself. I found a really cool guitarón sound library for free on pianobook.com. And then I've got sound libraries for violins and trumpets. I can work with those. The 2 that I would like but don't know about are the vihuela and the singer. Vihuela, I don't have access to. I don't have the instrument. I don't know how to play it, and I don't have a sound library for it. I would love to work with it, so I'm thinking about maybe cheesing it and just pitching up my guitar an octave using a capo and playing the chords that way. I might work with it. It wouldn't be exactly, but it would be close. And then the singer, this is entirely dependent on whether I have time to sit down and write some lyrics for my song. But I am a singer, and I would love to just kind of record somebody actually. We'll see. That one, like I said, these 2 are kind of maybes. But you gotta have fun. I'm having fun. I'm kind of geeking out about the possibilities, and I hope you are too, because that's half the fun of writing a soundtrack. So with this sound palette, I do have specific uses. All right. One, I just want to kind of create the general sound for my palette. For my film, I want to kind of create a more of a southwestern kind of style music, and like you can see here, I've got notes about trying to recreate something that I've listened to most of my life. And then very specifically, I want to create a more kind of lazy folk music kind of thing, something that you listen to on a slow day. Specifically because of this opening scene in the film, I want to get something that captures kind of this essence. Oops. Where it's just kind of scene, we're seeing it's in the shop. There's not a lot of people. I'm thinking about making it sort of like a source music, like it's playing on the radio in the background. Not sure what we'll do, but kind of cool stuff there. I want to create a baseline, kind of a lazy, hot day in an abandoned, empty store, because there are going to be multiple moments that we get back to that moment in time. So right here, we have the crazy moment with the piñata just got brained by the little girl. No, wait, no, that's not it. That's when she finds him. Here it is. Just got brained by the little girl, killed, and boom, we're right back. Piñata is freaking out. It would be fun to kind of bring back a lazy, soft, low stakes kind of music. A hot day in a store where no one shows up kind of thing. So that's kind of the general feel I want to create with my bass sound palette. And then my secondary sound palette, similar to the example I shared earlier with Raya and the Last Dragon, I want to add a bit more of an orchestral touch to things because I have a lot more experience writing for orchestra than I do writing for mariachi. And it would be a lot of fun, I think, to control for the more adventurous moments and the more kind of horror style moments with a more kind of traditional orchestra supporting the mariachi. With just kind of a couple things kept in mind, I'm probably not going to use a lot of percussion, all right? Because there are so many sound effects in here, and we'll kind of get to this later in this lesson, but I don't want to crowd the sonic space of the film. And since the percussion instruments I would use would be the most similar to the sound effects, I'm going to probably just kind of avoid those a little bit and just focus mostly on strings and brass. But that's basically what I came up with my soundscapes, my sound palettes. So I'll check some questions real quick. Does anyone have questions about sound palettes before we move on? How to use them, how to find yours, maybe you got some ideas, throw them by me real quick. Let's take some questions. And then if there are no questions about sound palettes, I'll move on and we'll start discussing spotting. Florian, my favorite is Studio One. It is really intuitive. Awesome. So we're talking about DAWs there. I've never worked with Studio One. I've got lots of students who have worked with it. It's kind of coming up in popularity. Darlene, are these like leitmotifs? Are sound palettes like leitmotifs? They can be used in similar ways. So with a leitmotif, for example, here we have a leitmotif. This is like the shortest version of my piñata theme that we'll be working with. Oops, it's muted. It's still muted. Here we go. That's the shortest idea of my soundtrack, or my theme for the piñata. That's the shortest thing. That's a leitmotif. I can use that to hint at him. This theme, these notes, this rhythm, this shape will be associated with this very specific character. A sound palette can be similar. There are kind of like various levels to it. A sound palette, the large one, your kind of base core sound palette, is going to be the sound of your movie. So again, John Williams uses huge romantic style orchestration for Star Wars. Hans Zimmer uses a much more unique and eclectic sound palette for his Detective Holmes, Sherlock Holmes movies with the banjo, the dulcimer, broken piano. One of my favorite all-time composers, Joe Hisaishi, uses a very kind of modal jazz, impressionistic era type orchestration and sound for Spirited Away. There are all kinds of different sounds that you can kind of create the general personality and style of your music. That's the primary sound palette. Secondary and tertiary sound palettes are kind of like next level up, kind of like little details. So, for example, in Raya and the Last Dragon, having a specific sound, the female vocalist, being paired with a very specific concept of the story, a very specific literary theme. In which case, you don't need specific notes. You only need kind of that sound of the singer. Another idea would be, and the idea is that the only time that sound is heard is with that paired with that literary idea. In that case, it can be used by a leitmotif. But at the very core, it's mostly just about kind of the personality and style of your music. Like I said, you can go as deep into this as you'd like. You can just go, all right, awesome, I'm going to work with orchestra. Boom, you're done. Awesome. Or maybe you can go, I'm going to work with orchestra, but my primary instruments are going to be trumpet and violin. They're going to be the main focus for melodies and such. Cool. You could say, all right, mostly orchestra, but I want this specific instrument. I want the bassoon to be used for the little girl, and I want a trumpet to be used for the piñata. Why? I don't know. Those were just random instruments I just spat out. It could be kind of any detail. You could have a specific idea where you're like, all right, I want to have an orchestral sound, but every time the horror elements come in, I'm going to use cluster chords with my string section. All right, and they're going to be paired with that specific kind of setting in the story. So it's all about how you use the instruments to help tell your story. Whereas leitmotifs are typically associated with like melodic ideas, the sound palette has a lot more to do how we're using the sounds themselves to kind of portray the story. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Florian, I do think it can have the same function like a character. Yep, exactly. Annabelle, what are all the different components of a potential sound palette? So the different, that's a good question. I've never really had to explain that. So what are the different components of a potential sound palette? If I had to kind of break it down, I would say the components of the sound palette are what instruments are you using to basically capture the setting of your story. So let's see. So let's say components of a sound palette. All right, I would say number one is which instruments are you using for the soundtrack? Let's make this a bit larger. Number two, once you've figured that out, is which instruments are the most important for the personality of your soundtrack. All right, so for John Williams, he uses the whole orchestra. Really cool. But the ones that are typically most emblematic of John Williams' music are the trumpets and French horns, and then some kind of timpani and percussion. But those two instruments, the soaring trumpets, kind of the rhythmic brass, those are very idiomatic of John Williams. Also likewise for like Hans Zimmer with Interstellar. He uses piano, he uses traditional orchestra, he uses all these sounds for the soundtrack of Interstellar, but the one that is most important to the personality, the one that we all remember, is the huge, massive pipe organ. All right, and then which instruments or sounds are paired with specific ideas slash moments. I will say slash strategies with your music. So these would be kind of the three levels I'd say if I had to break it down of a sound palette. Which instruments are you just going to use in general? Which ones are just available to you? Which ones are most important for the core personality of your sound? And then what specific uses do you have for a couple of the specific instruments? Are they paired with a character? Are they paired with an idea? Like anytime the energy goes higher, you go higher in the strings. Are they paired with specific moments? Like anytime things get dark, you bring in lots of low brass. Or do you have like a specific thematic idea? Like we talked about maybe the potential of the piñata having to learn it has to take more charge in its own life. So maybe you decide, I really like that idea. And there are all these moments where we see the piñata fail to take charge. What if I had a specific sound or instrument paired that I would use in scenes where the piñata is not taking charge? Anytime it tries to hide, anytime it just kind of sits and wallows, you're going to use a specific sound versus the moments where it decides, I'm going to do something, I'm going to escape, then it becomes a new sound kind of thing. This is just, the sound palette is basically how creative are you being with your sound? How are you using the individual instruments and sounds to help tell the story? So that was a really good question, Annabelle. Thank you. Florian asks, couldn't it be problematic to use a lot of exotic instruments? At least when you want to have your track recorded by real instrument players, you have to know how the instrument works and find players. It can be. It just depends on what kind of work you want to do. If you want to learn, so for example, I've been doing a lot of research on the vihuela and guitarrón and how to write for them. Yesterday, I started kind of like experimenting with orchestrating some of my earlier thematic ideas for this, and I had to write out the chords for the vihuela on finale. And I had to learn out what are the open strings, how are the chords performed, and yes, it took a lot longer because I couldn't just write it down. I had to double check everything to make sure this was the correct sound I was looking for. It's frustrating, it can be, but it depends on your project. For example, I have no intention of any of this ever being played by real people. All right? If you have no intention of having your soundtrack performed at any point, then why care about making sure it's playable? Why care about idiosyncrasies of the instruments? At that point, if no one's ever going to play it, then the golden rule applies. And that golden rule of composing is always, does it sound good? All right, do you like the way it sounds? Go for it. It's not problematic at all. If you decide that you need to work with real performers, and if I really wanted a vihuela player to write this, Then there are different ways I can work with this. I could either hire an actual performer to write the part for me based off a sketch I give them, or more likely, I would just come up with kind of chord progression. I'd say, all right, here's the melody, here's all the parts I have. I need you to just strum these chords, use whatever pattern you want. We'll take a couple takes and figure out what we want to do. That's actually what Hans Zimmer did for the Sherlock Holmes series. He created these themes and ideas, and he shared them with a lot of Roma performers and said, have fun with it. Let's just improvise based off these ideas. And a lot of those recordings ended up being used in the actual soundtrack itself. So Darlene, where do you find a rhythm to help make your theme? From the movie, from the movement of the character, etc., or do you just make it up? All of the above. All right, inspiration can come from all kinds of sources. Sometimes I will just, if I'm fed up, I'll sit down, I'll clap out 10 rhythms. I'll write them out, and I'll figure out which one I like the best. Typically, like for this one, I come up with my target tones, and then I kind of sing to find my rhythm. It's really up to you. There's a lot of different strategies you can take, and I actually just had a conversation with another YouTuber, Zach, and professional composer, Zach Heidi. Just posted that video yesterday. It was a really fun conversation, and he and I both talk about kind of issues with telling stories in films, and one of the big things that kind of came up, and there was the idea that yes, you have different strategies you gravitate towards, but every single project is different. The source of inspiration you get for a theme will be different every single film. I've had films where I sang along with the film, and that's how I got my theme. I've had projects where I got so frustrated with not having anything come to me that I just sat down and treated it like an intellectual exercise, and I wrote something that I knew intellectually would work, even though I didn't care much for it. But I was on a time crunch, so I just kept pushing it, and then eventually I was able to take this very kind of like square boxed in academic exercise and turn it into something I actually did enjoy. I've had moments where I just get an idea. They are rare and few and far between, but there'll be times where I just kind of whistle or hum something. I get excited, I record it on my phone, and then later on in the studio, I just kind of figure it out on my keyboard and work with it from there. So I wish it was more standardized, but that's kind of the allure and frustration of film scoring, is it will be different where you find your inspiration every time. There's writing for players and there's writing for samples. Exactly. Jay, hello. Thank you so much for making content. You are truly one of the goats on this platform. Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. You're making me happy, Jay. I recommend your series quite often to the music production students. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I love what I do. I love teaching. I love composing. And I'm just very blessed and fortunate to have such a supportive community around me. So thank you. On that note, actually, since I do have student loan payments coming up, if you would like to show support, if you would like to show appreciation for what I do on the channel or anything else like that, I have a coupon code for all the things on my website. Just use IFMC. I believe it's a pinned comment on here. 15% off. I have ebooks on creating realistic mock-ups, ebooks on portraying emotions with music, and for a limited time, I've released my textbook that I'm writing on just composing in general. Everything from the very first chapter, which is how to read music notation, to the very last chapter, which is polishing your orchestral mock-ups. It is 36 chapters long, nearly 400 pages. It is currently being published by a larger publishing company, but the process is moving so slow that I'm just kind of releasing a draft now on my website because I haven't signed a contract yet. And so even though we're moving further, they said it's fine, so it should be fine. So yeah, check it out. Really cool stuff on there. If you want to show your support, I would really appreciate it. Help me get out of my student debt. I'm American. It's very crippling, but thank you. I'll get off my soapbox now. All right, shameless self-plug out of the way. Georgia says, if you wanted to make a sad or happy interpretation of your motif, how would you modify your sound palette but have the motif still be recognizable? Oh, awesome. So the motif itself actually wouldn't matter so much about the instrumentation. In fact, if you'll notice, my motif right here. So that's the shortest kind of idea from my motif. Over here we have the full thing. I'm back and forth about that little lick. I think I'll add the lick in there. This is just a piano sketch. I haven't orchestrated this, arranged it at all. I've got a basic kind of feel of the texture I want. But if I want to change the emotion, and we'll kind of get into that because talking about emotions in music is something I really geek out about. For those of you who don't know, I actually went to school to be a therapist and not a composer. I was halfway through grad school being trained to work as a therapist in a hospital setting when I realized I hate my life doing this, I want to do music, and my parents were thrilled. It's worked out though, and so I have all this kind of background. 6 years of my life were spent studying psychology, emotions, personalities, therapy modalities, and I do love that. And so my favorite way to combine them is to talk about portraying emotions in music. And I'm going to try and stay on topic because I do have a time budget today, and that will be if you want to learn more about like my basic approach, go to tabletopcomposer.com. It's my website. Go to my blog over here, and then top 127 views. Woo! May 18th. How do you portray emotions with music? This is my post, and it basically breaks down my philosophy on if you can describe the emotion itself. I introduce a model called the circumplex model of effect. And basically you can figure out the basic vibe or kind of mood for your emotion, and then you can get more specific from there using the tips that we've used in this series, actually. So all that to say, the basic idea of changing the emotion of your music and your motif without making it unrecognizable is to figure out what your non-negotiables are. All right, what are you not willing to compromise that would change your sound? So for me, it's probably whatever makes up this little idea. So it's kind of that little lick. I have the stretch of a sixth at the core of it with a little bit of movement. It's kind of like a little syncopated, swing, relaxed folk kind of rhythm. So if I were to say, how do I change this? I would say the things I'm not willing to compromise are the general lengths of the notes. So I can change them, but these notes have to be much longer than the middle ones. And the overall stretch around a sixth. I want this to be a large leap. And if I know, and the contour, I want it to move up. So those are my 3 things. Contour, moving up, general lengths of the notes, and it includes a leap. Those are my 3 things that define this motif for me. Anything else is fair game. I can change the instruments. I can change the harmony. I can change the tempo, slow it down or speed it up. I can do whatever I'd like as long as I maintain those 3 integral elements that I believe form the personality of this motif. It'll always work as that motif. It'll fit. Some of them might be a little more obscure than others. But once you figure out what your non-negotiables are, once you figure out what the core of your theme is, anything else is fair game. Anything else can change. Anything else can be developed or manipulated to help create the general mood that you want to do. And if you don't have time to read my blog post, the basic idea behind it is if you can describe your emotion based off how dark or bright it is and how intensely it is experienced, you can translate that to pretty well to music. So if sadness is kind of a darker emotion and it's pretty low energy, if you think about the way we express sadness, kind of slumped over in chairs, kind of sitting in bed, not really want to doing things, keeping your thoughts to yourself, kind of stewing over things, just you kind of lose energy. If you can portray that with your music, saying, all right, lower energy, darker sound, it's going to make your sound much sadder. All right, if you decide that you want to do the opposite, you want to think about happiness, much brighter sound, much more energy. Think about what people do when they're super happy. They dance, they clap, they laugh, they get excited. That's a higher energy emotion. These are very general simplifications. But the general idea is if you can control for how dark or how much energy your music has, you can get a general mood or vibe. After that, it's about just kind of creating additional context through gestures. Basically, how can you brainstorm different ways of artistically portraying that emotion? But I have gotten off the rails at the moment. We are supposed to be talking about spotting. Let me check the quick questions real quick. See, so Georgia, I hope that helps. Vivek Hygienist, you are a blessing for learners like me and us here. Thank you, Vivek. It's been a while since you've been on one of the streams. I really appreciate it. And welcome, Tamashi. Awesome. It is always weird when people call me a genius or something like that. I don't view myself like that. I'm just a guy having fun and loving what I do. But thank you. I do appreciate it. I'm glad that so many people find my content helpful because that's what I do it for. So now let's kind of move on. I'm going to swap over to my lesson notes again so that I'm not distracted by all the comments, but I will come back. This is what I'm looking at. You can download this below to get all the kind of information you need. We just went over sound palettes, so now it's time to talk about spotting, which is this huge kind of mythical thing that if you've read any books on film scoring or if you watched any documentaries, you know about the spotting session. All right, the spotting session is when the composer, the director, and the music editor all go in a room together. All right, maybe there's other people there too, but they watch the film and the director tells them, I want the music to start here. All right, I want the music to hit this moment. I want it to kind of get this kind of little movement going on here to portray what this character is thinking. And the director basically tells the composer how and where they want the music to interact with the film. The composer has a lot of input on this as well, depending on who your director is and how much kind of trust they have in you. But in lots of times, for example, this one, we do not have access to a director. Or sometimes, for example, I've had moments where I've been brought on a project before there was a director, particularly in live performances. So I've scored a couple of plays. And with those, I was brought on by the playwright himself, all right? So he's writing the story. He wants me involved with writing the story because he knows music's going to be a big part. And so I collaborate with him, and I don't get the chance to talk with a director because there is no director yet. So for these kinds of situations, it's important to know how to do it yourself. And for this, I've kind of got a little process I'll be sharing, and it involves a little template that looks like this. Basically, we are going to break down every scene. So we've looked at the film already. We know that scene 1 starts here, or around here. Looks like I forgot to mark it. I forgot to lock this in place when I changed the tempo for my sketching. So that's a bummer, but that's why we have the scene list. But we're going to go for scene 1. We're basically going to figure out where are the hit points. This is number 1, because as you're spotting, you're looking for 2 things. You're looking for technical parameters, and you are looking for musical parameters. So first things first, let's find our scene list so I can figure out what my times are. All right, so SMPTE in was 5 seconds, second frame. That's where scene 1 ends. So let's switch to SMPTE up here. That's time code. SMPTE, remember, that stands for Society of Motion SMPTE is Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and it's a standardized code that allows us to figure out where every single frame is. So that's the 5 second. We're looking for 5 second, second frame right there. So that's where scene 1 starts. Normally, or I wouldn't say normally, often, well, yeah, pretty much normally. If you're going to work on a full project, they will have SMPTE code on the screen. Every frame will carry the SMPTE code. You've probably seen those numbers at the bottom of a film. For this competition, we do not have SMPTE, unfortunately. But it's all right, because we can still use SMPTE code using the strategies that I shared in lesson number 1. So from lesson number 1 and my scene list, I'm seeing that scene 1 starts at 5th second, second frame, and it ends on the 50th second, 15th frame. And you can see, as a reminder, it goes the hour. So how many hours have passed, how many minutes have passed, how many seconds, and what frame are you on? So we're still haven't passed an hour, still haven't passed a minute. We're 50 seconds in, 15th frame. That's when it ends. So let's go 50th right here. And then it's 50th and 15th. 50th, 12th. My mic is in my way. That's 12th, 15th right here. So that is where we decided the first scene ends. So let's put that here. Scene 2. So that was where it ends, which means 50, 16 is where is it, 15? Let's see, my SMPTE on here goes too far down. 15, 50, 50, 15. Here it is, 15, 16 is where it goes. So let's look at the scene, shall we? We'll watch the scene once together, and then we will start spotting it, shall we? Let's see here. Riveting things, trying to get this done on my microphone situation. It's like blocking my second screen. All right, there we go. All right, so here we go. Got that up. Let's watch the film. Let's make sure that the film is solid now. relationship. Yay. End of scene 1. All right, so that's scene 1. Our job now is to spot it. And as I mentioned earlier, as you were spotting, we're looking for 2 things. We are looking for the technical responsibilities of the music, or I should say technical responsibilities of the scene, and then we're looking for the musical responsibilities of the scene. So what those kind of look like, the first one are technical parameters. What we're looking for are contour shifts. Now, a contour shift is another word for like a hit point. In a story or film, the contour, a shift in contour I should say, is anytime you are given new information. And that new information results in either a new energy level, a new emotional experience, or just kind of a furthering of the plot. Something that makes you wonder, oh, what's next then? Because A just happened, that means something else needs to happen as well. What will B be kind of thing. So one or more of those 3 things: new emotion, new energy level, or furthering of the plot. It's always new information. Now, as I was watching that scene, I noticed a couple moments that stuck out right away. First one being probably around the time where the piñata, when we see it kind of sigh, and then boom, we move aside, and what the new information is, we now realize the piñata has been here alone for a very long time. We see all the tick marks. Next little kind of moment is actually a sound effect. We hear the sound of the door open. All right, that means something is going to happen. All right, now the next one I noticed isn't when we see the little girl, because we already knew that. We knew someone walked in. What struck out to me next after that was when the piñata straightens up. All right, because that establishes a very important rule. It means that we're working with Toy Story rule sets here. All right, the piñata cannot be seen moving around by the little girl. All right, it has to just kind of sit there immobile and let her do whatever she wants to do. So that's an important rule, because we're going to see throughout the film that anytime the piñata is about to escape, if it gets seen, it freezes and then she just grabs it. All right, so that's going to be important. So that's a good piece of information. We need to notice that, so that's going to be another hit point. And then the last one, I think, was something along the lines of like when they, like the little friendship thing, which annoys me. This moment right here has annoyed me every time I've watched it. And it's because of the music. All right, you hear that? Little scale moving up. That makes it harder for the composer. All right, it's annoying. We can work with it. We will work with it. That'll be next lesson probably. But it's still kind of annoying. All right, there's a musical element. Now we have to go through the trouble of figuring out, all right, what's the pitch? What's the scale they were just doing? There's like a pedal tone. You can hear like the pedal tones. You can hear little drones setting the bass like with a little airy synth, and then we hear a scale running up. So we're going to have to figure that out. That'll be fun. But it's cool. I knew that this film was going to be difficult because it has a lot of sound effects. More on that in a moment. Actually, more on that right here. All right, so actually, first, the hit points are important to notice because these are the moments where the contour in the film shifts. The story is moving forward, which means the music can do something. Anytime you have a hit point, what that means is that you can match a change in the scene with a change in the music. Your music can do something. It can produce a specific theme. It can change its size, energy level, textures, harmony. Any of those 9 parameters that we discussed in lesson... that was lesson 2. Lesson 2. Any of those 9 parameters, the tempo, texture, timbre, rhythm, register, harmony, pitch, articulation, dynamics, any of those 9 kind of parameters of music, you can do something with one or more of those to kind of mark that the music and story are related to each other. So that's why it's important to find the hit points. Now, number 2 of the technical responsibilities has to do with the sonic foreground, and that's what makes this film particularly difficult to score. The other film, The Cook, has its own sorts of difficulty in terms of not having a very linear story. It's a very much more artistic film. But that one has almost no sound effects, which means the music can kind of really see the foreground. Because at any given point, you have 3 elements in your sonic kind of playground as the film. You have dialogue, you have sound effects and sound design, and you have music. Now, Of those three, only one of them can be in the foreground at a time. Now, the foreground is just whatever you want your audience to pay the most attention to. All right, so if you want your audience to pay the most attention to the music, then by definition, they cannot give the majority of their attention to either this dialogue or the sound effects. And because of that, there happens to be a very strict hierarchy. And that is, dialogue is king, and if there is no dialogue, then it goes important sound effects and sound design. And then if there's neither of those, then the music can take the foreground. That doesn't mean you can't have music in the other two situations. It just means that your music needs to stay in the background. It cannot demand attention. It cannot distract the audience. Now, dialogue is pretty self-explanatory. If characters are talking, the music cannot distract from that. Sound effects are a little more kind of, there's some more wiggle room, right? So it only matters if they are important. All right, now important sound effects tend to have three responsibilities. All right, they are either unexpected. So for example, you're in a scene, you're relaxing, everything's kind of low key, and then a plate shatters in the next room over. Well, maybe that would be it, but there's like a clap of thunder outside. Something that is unexpected. The audience didn't see it coming. All right, that's important to allow that to grab their attention. They weren't going to expect it, and so when it happens, they need to kind of see it stick out. That one's okay. It's a little more case-by-case dependent. The more important one are sound effects that provide information to your audience. Something like the character is sitting in a room, and then you hear a door open off camera, and you find out there's someone entering the apartment. That sound effect told us something. That sound effect basically acted like dialogue. It let us know what was happening on screen. Now, if two characters are on screen and they open the door and you watch them do it, that's not necessarily an important sound effect. All right, we didn't need to hear the door open in order to know the door was opening. But if the sound effect is happening for something off screen, and it's important that that sound effect tells us what's happening, someone walking up the hall behind the character, someone opening a door off screen, someone shouting, well, I guess someone's shouting, "Stop thief," that would be dialogue. But you get what I'm saying. Things that provide context and like forward momentum for the story, things that give the audience information, those are important, and you cannot distract away from them with your music. And then the third type are basically just sounds that are associated with important plot points. These are the most vague kind of things, all right? So this is kind of the MacGuffin kind of sound effects. If you've got this giant machine, it's a doomsday device, and it's making a low menacing kind of humming noise as it turns on, you don't want to cover up that noise with the music because it has to do with an important element in the movie, all right? It's similar to kind of dialogue. So if there's dialogue, music can't distract from it. If there are sound effects or sound design that are acting similarly to dialogue, music cannot distract from it. If neither of those exist, then yeah, do what you want with the music, make it big, make it bombastic, do all kinds of cool things. One of my favorite examples is from Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End, where there's the moment when the pirates are sailing looking for Captain Jack Sparrow, and they have this kind of conversation going on as they're going through a frozen ocean. They're going through a frozen sea. They're talking, the music is beautiful, it's underneath, but it's not until the dialogue stops and the camera pans out and we get this beautiful shot of kind of the scenery that the music just goes ham. All right, we get this beautiful crescendo, incredible themes, beautiful example of Hans Zimmer's craftsmanship and artistry. And it's only allowed to happen like that because the characters aren't talking and there's no sound effects. If the pirates had been delivering important information and Hans Zimmer just starts blasting away with the music, then what's going to happen is in the editing room, the director goes, "We need to hear them, bring the music down." And suddenly you have this beautiful, massive music that's being forced artificially underneath the dialogue. So this is why we're kind of looking for. We're trying to, as we spot the scene, we're looking for the hit points, we're looking for dialogue, we're looking for sound effects, we're looking for moments where your music can kind of support the story or do its own thing. Now, if your music does need to stay in the background, I've got these notes up here. There's lots of different strategies. These are by no means the only strategies available. They tend to be very useful strategies, but you can go either just no music, and we discussed that in lesson 1, reasons why not to have music. You can reduce your instrumentation, so maybe if you've got a full orchestra, Maybe when the dialogue starts, you bring it down to just a small little string section. You can use soft tone colors, things that don't stick out. So things like flutes are nice, strings are nice, piano is very nice. Things like a trumpet tend to stick out a bit more. Oboe definitely sticks out. Things with a little bit of a harsher quality, a little more unique quality that aren't meant for blending in. Those things you kind of avoid during moments where the music can't be in the foreground. Sustained textures means basically instead of going with themes and such, just go with some chords. Something soft, something that moves slowly and just sets a bit of ambience in the background. Predictability is one of the most powerful tools and means basically start becoming very, very repetitive with your music. In fact, this is the go-to strategy for a lot of action films and action scenes where there is dialogue. And you need big, heavy, loud music. What you do is before the dialogue starts, you start with really loud, bombastic music, but you make it very repetitive. Maybe just a couple chords, maybe just a repetitive rhythmic idea. Things aren't changing too much. It sets the mood, and then because it becomes repetitive and predictable, suddenly it falls into the background, and the dialogue, being the most interesting thing, is able to take the foreground and take center stage. If you want a little more in-depth explanation of that, I have a video on the 3 pillars of great orchestration. You can find it in my advanced orchestration techniques playlist. I think I need to change the name of that because I've had people tell me that they're intimidated to watch advanced orchestration videos. They're really not advanced. It's just moving beyond instrumentation. The videos talk about underlying principles of arranging and orchestrating instead of the flute has a range of C4 to D7 kind of thing. Let's see here. And then condensed pitch range, another thing you can do, just kind of reduce it. If your music was all over the place, just bring it back down into a tight little spot, maybe just an octave or so. Remove your melody or just really, really reduce it. And then the last one, avoid musical tone colors that are similar to the foreground. This is probably going to be very important for us in this film because there are a lot of sound effects. And the instruments that are typically most similar to the sound effects that are being used tend to be woodwinds and percussion instruments. At least that's my impression of it. That's my opinion. So personally, I'm probably going to avoid using too many percussion instruments or woodwind instruments to do this. So once we've gone through and kind of figured that out, we can start doing the musical parameters. But for now, let's move through and actually spot scene 1 along these technical parameters. While we're doing this, I'll explain my decisions. And if anyone has questions, any questions about spotting, any question about these technical parameters that we've been talking about, put them in the comments. I will address them after this. All right, so start of the scene. Opening scene. All right, so for me, that's the first hit point. We are not going to be able to get too specific with this because we don't have SMPTE code on screen. I'm going to go based off the sound. All right, so we sigh, little whine, first tick. All right, first ticking noise showing this is where we're getting new information. So that's 0 hours, 0 minutes, 18 seconds, 8th frame. That's what we're going to go with that. We're going to ignore that other number. Oh, wrong one. That's my lesson notes. These are my spotting notes. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to put in here, I'll actually say scene number, we'll say scene number 1. We'll say opening scene. All right. We know the SMPTE code from up here. So we'll say SMPTE in for this scene. And I'll have one of these for each scene that we do. However, I'm only going to spot this first scene because I don't want to do all the work for you guys. Which reminds me, if you have not signed up for this competition, if you don't have access to this film, and you'd like to, oh, wrong one. Check the fine folks over at the Indie Film Music Contest have given us a coupon code very generously. It is tabletop. It's included in the notes here. Use coupon code tabletop to get 10% off your registration fee. You get access not only to this film, but you get access to a second film called The Cook as well. So this is where the scene starts. This is where the scene ends. Contour number 1. What did we say that was? 18:08. So we'll say 0 for 0 hours, 0 minutes. We're 18 seconds in, 8th frame. All right. And in parentheses, I'll say tick marks. All right. This is where we're kind of learning. I'm going to put this, because I like it to look nice. Let's do centered. All right. We've got our first hit point. I won't add a marker just yet because I'm going to do a separate file for my actual scoring of this scene so I can use tempo mapping. Keep going. So we've got that information. Wow. Poor Piñata. He's been there for so long. What? Someone just entered the shop. All right. There we go. Right here. And we don't need to hit it exactly. Because, again, with the hit points, we'll kind of get... sometimes I like to hit right on the mark. Sometimes we'll go a little bit around, but we'll talk about that more in the next lesson when I actually score this first scene with all of you. So, 25th second, 0 frames. All right, so let's see here. 0 minutes, or 0 hours, 0 minutes, 25 seconds, 0 frames. In fact, I'm going to go first frame, all right? Because 0 frames seemed a little loose. Door opens. All right, that's the information. All right, so the first hit point was a hit point because we got new information that told us someone just entered. Well, we got information that no one has been in this store in almost 1,000 days. All right, then the next hit point is a hit point because now we hear someone just entered the door. All right, we've got someone who's here. Let's find out where the next one is. What's gonna happen next? It's a little girl. That could be a hit point. That could be a hit point. You could definitely do that if you'd like. I like to err on the side of too few hit points than too many. That's my strategy, though. I like to have the music... I like music that tells a story, but I also like my music to be a little more independent. I'm not much for Mickey Mousing. We'll learn a little bit about Mickey Mousing in future lessons, but for now, I'd like to have fewer hit points. That's what works for me. However, lots of composers, like John Powell, have a massive amount of hit points where they're hitting something with their music every few seconds. So whatever style you prefer, go for it. I'm happy for you. Congratulations. More power to you. That's wonderful news. But here, we got 31 seconds, 10th frame. So I'm going here, 0 hours, 0 minutes. What second was that? It was 31st? Yep, 31st second, 10th frame. 31st second, 10th frame. Piñata freezes. I really need to figure out how to put the tilde over my ends, if I can type. Piñata freezes. That's important because now we've established a rule for the story. The piñata cannot be seen. All right? If it's seen, it freezes. So that's kind of a common trope in horror films, horror video games. If you're seen, it's over kind of thing. So let's figure out what's next. Hold up. I just noticed something. That's cool. Little girl's humming something. I wonder, some entropizing composer would say, awesome, the little girl just gave us her own motif. Maybe I'll do that. Probably not. But someone else can do that. That would be a really cool idea. Could you make an entire theme based off this short little idea that the actress or actor or whoever did the music or the character did? Little girl sees the piñata. You know what? I'm going to mark it. That's going to be my last one. That's my last hit point. Little girl sees the piñata. Right there. We see have the little chime. You'll notice that it's a very audible sound effect, so we're not really going to do much with that. Percussion-wise. So that's 15th, 36th, 15th. And that's going to be the last hit point. All right? 36. It was 15, right? Terrible short-term memory. Yep, 36, 15. All right. Let me double check. Make sure that's the last one I want to work with. Is that annoying little musical thing that we're going to have to work with? She pays. Lovely. The piñata for only $1. Where do you get a piñata for only $1? I would love to know that. Let's see. Oh yes, I forgot to add the note. Piñata freezes. We'll call her LG. LG finds P. All right. Finds piñata. All right. So we've got our contour. These are our marks, and we'll notice that these marks help break the scene into different chunks. All right. We have the time up to this moment. We have the time up to this moment or in between, however you want to put it. And it's going to be kind of moments that we're describing each of these chunks from here on out. Now, we talked about these three kind of sonic elements. Is there dialogue? Are there sound effects? For all of these, there is no dialogue at all in this entire short film. So we have that going for us. That's really cool. It gives us more opportunities. Where is the little... There we are. Gives us more opportunities to do something with the music. Sound effects, however, are quite heavy. So let's go section by section. First one being around the 18 minute marker. So beforehand, in fact, let's do one to the left. Opening, so there we go. So what kind of sound effects do we have in this opening moment, do we? Let's find out. Alright, puppy cry. So puppy noises, ticking. Alright, excellent. So, to me, the only noises that step out, because all we're going to do is we're going to write down the important sound effects. All right, the only ones that stick out to me as being particularly important are sad puppy noises. All right, to me, these stick out because they give us insight to the character. Whatever the music does, I need to make sure it does not compete with that. So maybe that'll be during the longer moments. If I can find the timing, it would be ideal. If we look at what I've got here, there are a couple moments where I have longer notes. So maybe, in fact, let's go over to the fuller arrangement. What if I tried to time it? And then, da-da. What if I try to get the longer notes to match up with the puppy noises? That's one idea. I'm not going to dive too deeply now because all I really need to keep in mind is that, oh, that's my lesson plan notes. Where am I? Here we are. All I need to remember are that the sad puppy noises are important. All right, so sonic foreground, what is the most important? Sound effects first, then music. All right, so once the sad puppy noises are out, I'm good. All right, the ticking noise is okay, but it's not too important. That's just kind of a sound effect. It doesn't give us any new information. The ceiling fan spinning doesn't give us new information. It's just something happening on screen, so we have a sound for it. So sound effects during the sad puppy noises, those need to be heard in the foreground. They need to take precedent because that's essentially the closest thing we get to dialogue in this film. Other than that, music is fine. So at the 18-second, 8-minute marker, the first sound effect that hits me as important is open door. All right, that's super important. All right, because that is one of those sound effects that happens off screen. All right, we now know that something is happening and we need to pay attention to it. Let's mute this. New scene start, a new hit point, door opens, little girl, laughing, so important. I'm gonna say P freezes. All right, piñata freezes. That noise of the piñata freezing is important because, again, that's an important moment. We need to establish this rule in the story that the piñata cannot be seen alive in more than a way than one. Alright, and then happy friend noises. Alright, so that's going to be important because it clashes with the music. So I'm thinking we'll have to do something not too motivic. Maybe figure out what that chord being held underneath it with kind of the gliss under it. And that might be a moment to get our kind of little girl's theme. Where is it? Kind of like play that over this little sound, find the key. That would work pretty well. In fact, I think that's probably the simplest way to kind of deal with it, which is one of the reasons why I wrote the little girl's motif to be just one chord. Much easier to work over with moments like this. So those are the important moments. So for this one, I'm just going to say sound effects. All right, sound effects is king in this little section. There's a lot going on. We can't mess with it. So during this section, the music should come back down. All right, so then we have the door opens. Oh, wait, so that was the... Oh, wait, 1 second. Oh, yeah, so that was the tick marks. So over here... No, there were no sound effects for this one. So music is important for this one. We kind of glossed over that one. This one is where sound effects are most important. When the door opens, piñata freezes. And yeah, this is actually kind of what we were going. We kind of breezed past the other ones. That's my bad, but we got it. Open door, piñata freezes. Happy friend noises. All right, so these are all moments where the music is going to take a back road. That does not mean that I can't have music here. I need to repeat that again. Just because sound effects or dialogue are more important does not mean you cannot have music underneath. It just means whatever music you write, you need to be careful that it does not distract from the dialogue or sound effects that are more important. So, in which case, those strategies we talked about earlier that you can find in the lesson plan notes, the more of those you can use, the safer it is to include music in that scene. So we'll just need to pay attention to that. Now, these things, contour, dialogue, sound effects, and sonic foreground, this concludes the technical parameters. In fact, I'm going to thicken this line here so that we can show kind of a divide. We have figured out the technical responsibilities of the scene. We know how the music and scene need to interact. Now, we need to kind of change focus and learn more about what the music itself needs to do, what it needs to accomplish, what you need to work with, how it needs to sound. Before we go into that, any question? Oh, yeah, lots of comments. All right, let's take a look at these. Here we go. There we go. Tomash was that one. Matt Lewis. What's needed harmonically for mariachi music? For example, chords left, right. There's not too much specifically for mariachi music. Typically, because you gotta think about mariachi music is a combination of multiple cultures. All right, so the Spaniards came to Mexico and they brought with them their traditions. Right, there's a lot of history involved in how this came about. All right, we're not a history channel, or I'm not a history channel, so we're not gonna dive too deeply into this. All we kind of know for our purpose is that a merging of cultures happened, and in a place called Jalisco, which is a state in Mexico, actually the area where my family is from, couple generation, my grandparents' generation, I should say, is from. The combination of these different cultures created a new kind of genre of music. The Spaniards brought instruments with them from Europe for religious services, for church things and whatnot. And the locals started modifying those instruments to create what we now know as the guitarrón and vihuela and a couple other really cool kind of instruments that are used. And the combination of indigenous and European cultures that kind of merged into modern-day Mexico kind of created this new genre of music. Now, all of this is important because the harmonic stylings of mariachi tend to be quite European in lots of ways, meaning they use functional harmony. There are still folk style elements to the harmony, but you can work with just traditional functional harmony, the tonic, subdominant, and dominant that we talked about in the last lesson, and create a perfectly fine harmony. In fact, if you'll notice my sketch here, that's pretty much what I do. C major, all right? C major for measure 1. Then we have D minor. That's strong, that's tonic, subdominant. Then another tonic functioning, so I'm going strong, weak, strong. This is A minor. Then we have F major, another weak chord. Then G major to create kind of like a little bit of a small cadence in the middle of the chord progression. And at the end, I use a 5. Here we go. Let me get the piano working on. I use a 5/7 half cadence. So I go basically. 5 chord, G major, then the 7 chord, which is the B diminished. Together, they spell out a G dominant 7 and pull to the C major. For the mariachi, it's going to be more about the other elements, all right? So the melody being harmonized by itself in kind of thirds. The instrumentation being used and the responsibilities of those instruments. So the guitarrón will typically, it's a giant jumbo bass guitar. Beautiful instruments. I really, really, really want one. They are played in octaves, very low, powerful strings plucked in octaves, and they play dynamic bass lines, meaning, yes, they hit the root notes, but they also do a bit more. They often improvise a little more of a melodic, moving bass line. The vihuela and guitar are typically played to give the rhythmic and harmonic elements, octaves apart from each other. Guitar plays the rhythm, and then the vihuela plays the same rhythm an octave higher, typically. Then you have instruments like the trumpets and violins being used to play the melody and counter melodies. Now, these types of instruments, it's different, all right? So the mariachi bands, in many cases, or the large ones, are treated more like a symphony than a rock band. In terms of when a member retires, they just they have another person who gets hired to fill that spot. All right? So, for example, my grandmother's cousin, I believe, was a founding member of Mariachi Pepe Villa. To my knowledge, Mariachi Pepe Villa still exists. All right, as each member, as generations go, retires, a new member is hired to play and fill that spot, much like a symphony orchestra. There are a lot of really cool nuances to the performance style. So one of the really, really cool things as a music nerd that I like to geek out about is that the trumpet players, and as a trumpet player myself, will actually match vibratos almost identically, which is very rare in most Western music. Meaning that when the instruments are going, like they're going up and down with their pitch a little bit, the mariachi will do a very strong, exaggerated vibrato in many cases. You'll hear it in the singers, you'll hear it in the trumpet players. But the cool thing is they will match that pattern. The trumpet players will go up the same exact amount. They will go down the same exact amount. They will match their vibrato at the same rate. So it makes the two instruments really sound like one voice playing in multiple layers. Really cool thing. I could geek about this for a long time. I've spent a lot of time reading up about mariachi music. I grew up listening to it, and I'm really excited to start kind of writing some of it for the first time. But that was a very unnecessarily long answer for your question, Matt. I hope it was helpful. Pavel says, you said you want to have 3 versions of your theme, bass and shortened version. Do you have this in mind when you write theme at first, or just make shorter version later? I just gotta make it later. So I'll start with my bass theme, this one right here. And then once I've got this, I'll just say, all right, I need one that's half as long. Usually, that's as simple as just making sure my first half is interesting. Or sometimes, if I find my second half to be more interesting, I'll go with that one instead. But sometimes it requires a little bit extra. All I know is that I need a theme that takes about half as long to perform. And again, we'll find out more about why in the next lesson when we start actually scoring each individual scene. Yeah, they're used for different lengths. So sometimes I only have a few split seconds. If we look at these spotting notes, you'll notice the first little section is 18 seconds long. But the second one is less than 10. All right, we've only got 18 to 25. I'm terrible at mental math, so I'm not even going to try. This last one I can do, that's 4 seconds, all right? Some of these are very short, all right? 18 seconds, yeah, I might have time for the full-length theme. 4 seconds? Definitely not. That's probably where I would need the much shorter variation. So that's the reason why I always do shorter things. Shorter variations. Visme, I'm really... No worries. Awesome. Thank you. Make sure... Yes, you'll make sure to watch the video later. Awesome. Yes, that's the beautiful thing about these things being posted later. You can always come back later. Annabelle, is there any way you can share with us a link to your spotting notes so we can use it as a template? Yes, there is. So all of my spotting notes are free in the lesson plan. You can piece them together. Everything I have covered in this kind of class, free. Take whatever you want from it. It's all in these lesson plans. However, if you were talking about the actual format, the actual worksheet that I have put together, this is also available, but it is not free. It is for sale on my website. Again, I don't want anyone going there and buying something and not realizing that it's free here. All right. So at this point, what you would be paying for is the convenience of me having it put together. I think it's like $10, and I have the worksheet and an example of what it looks like completely filled out. And if you use code IFMC in the pinned comment, you get 15% off anything that you want on my website. You can basically your entire order if you want to buy some of my ebooks as well. But like I said, I want to stress again, the biggest part of this channel is trying to make music education more equitable. You do not need to pay for it. All of this information is in the lesson plans. So if you download the free lesson plans and notes for every video, you can find all the information there. But if you would like to support me in the work I do, check out the website. There's a lot of really cool stuff you can buy there. Florian, is the Andalusian cadence a common feature of mariachi music? No idea. I'm not sure what the Andalusian cadence is. That's the beautiful thing about music theory. There are always really cool things that you can find. I do, however, have a very specific cadence. Let me see if I pull up my mariachi notes. Notes for writing mariachi. There is a very specific cadence, specifically to the son, which is a type of music, mariachi song with, let's see, it says, kind of, it's, I'm not a strong piano player, so let's see if we can do both voices. And then it's G. So it's kind of cool. I think I played that wrong, but it's all right. But you get the that's a very traditional way to end a mariachi son. Like you'll hear ba 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 bum bum. But there's lots of different ways to end it. You're not kind of limited to one area. Unfortunately, I don't know what the Andalusian cadence is. Florian, Andalusian cadence, flat major 7, flat major 6, 5 7 1. So that would be flat major 7, flat major 6, 5 7, and then minor 1. I don't know. Playing it on piano, it doesn't sound too familiar to me, but I imagine if it was arranged and voice-led specifically, it might be. Annabelle, is the template My Spotting Process? Yes, exactly. It's the My Spotting Process in my bookstore. Has the worksheet and, like I said, a filled-out example of how I used it to spot a short film called The Foundling. That's another YouTube playlist I did here where I spotted that film as well. Oh, the Hit the Road Jack cadence. Yeah. So yeah, you say it put that way. I'm not sure. Maybe. It's up to you. If you hear it, that's awesome. You can use that cadence if you'd like. I don't think, to my knowledge, that it's a particularly important. It's not like if you want to write mariachi, use this cadence kind of thing. Lots of the time, they use the authentic cadence. That's what that whole thing. That's the authentic cadence. It's a D major to G major. So there's that. Awesome. So, my pleasure, Annabelle. I hope it's useful. Again, another plug. If you want to show your support for what I do on this channel, check out my website, my bookshop. I have books on emotions of music. I have books on writing, creating realistic sounding mock-ups using your software of choice. I've got, and a textbook temporarily available online for 30 days only because it's being published into a hard copy book soon. I can't keep it up there for too long, but that covers everything, all right? 36 chapters, nearly 400 pages, everything from how to read rhythm in chapter 1 all the way to polishing the sound on your entirely orchestral arrangement that you composed using, and like mixing and mastering it. Everything you could possibly need to know about composing. That was my goal. Actually working with it, my editors were asking me to break it into 3 different books, but that was my point where I was like stopping. I was like, no, that's the whole point. I want this book to cover everything. Part 1 covers harmony, everything you need to know about that. Part 2 is melody writing and structures. And part 3 is kind of orchestration and electronic technology for bringing your music to life. The entire thing is batched together with basically the lens of how do you tell stories with music. So check it out. Again, code IFMC to get 15% off. I will get off my soapbox, my business, self-promotion. Let's do the musical elements now. So let's see here, because I am running out of time. I'm supposed to be meeting someone soon. Apologies. Musical parameters. Oh yeah, these are pretty self-explanatory, especially for composers and people who speak kind of musically. All right, we're looking for energy. Basically, what moment of our scene has the highest energy, which one has the lowest, etc. Kind of where do they move around? How do the emotions flow? So in each chunk, which emotion or emotions are key to each section? Then consider the musical texture. Again, remember, texture has to do with the number and types of layers. So, in moments where the music is king, music can be brought forward, you can use something more complex, like melody, rhythmic chords, and bass line. Moments where there's a lot of dialogue, maybe you just want sustained chords. Kind of describe what's the structure of your music going to be, and then typically what kind of style. Do you have a specific sound palette that you want to use for this? And then the final one, again, going back to that technical function of film music, the way that you use continuity in musical material to tell your story. What themes can we use for each of these? And like I said, this one tends to be a little bit quicker since it comes a bit quicker. Energy level, let's watch the theme real quick and let's see what happens. Let's go in here. Alright, puppy is sighing. I think this is probably going to be pretty intimate music here. And yet, at the same time, the texture will be a little bit more interesting. Bigger energy. Alright, things are building. Things are kind of exciting. What's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen. Things are moving. The girl finds them. Boom. And then, biggest energy of the scene is what I'm thinking. The big kind of lovey, reunite, friends discovering each other feeling. And then we go. So let's go through these notes really quickly. I'm getting phone calls from people. I lost track of time. But they know I'm teaching. They should be fine. Energy level. All right, so sad puppy noises. All right, relatively low. All right, so the opening, sad puppy noises, this is up to the ticks. Emotions, slow, a little lazy, and sad. All right, lethargic. All right, I'm gonna put this the biggest one. Right, there's not a lot going on. We have seen that the store has been abandoned for like 1,000 days. The piñata is sad, kind of defeated. Thematic material, piñata's theme, and texture, melody plus chords plus bass line, and then we'll say in parentheses plus counter melody. It depends on how I end up finally doing this full theme for the piñata. Next one was the tick marks, and this is a very short one. From tick marks to when the doors open, that is going to be 7 seconds. See, I can do mental math. 7 seconds to take a minus a little bit because of the frames. Let's see here. Energy level, still low. We'll say still low. And then when the door opens, we'll go building, piñata freezes, building / maintaining energy, and the final one, highest energy. All right. So this is kind of our energy map. After this, emotions, we'll say defeated and kind of sad. With the energy, the door opens, excitement, building excitement, joy, and happiness. All right, the friends have found each other. Let's see, thematic material, piñata's theme. Let's see here. This is the tick marks. Piñata's theme continued. Still, I think we can get away with that, especially since the music can really take the foreground in this section. When the door opens, we have sound effects. We can say we'll leave this one blank. I might not need to use a theme here. We'll say hint. We'll say girl's theme. Actually, we'll say piñata's theme. So we introduced the little girl. The piñata's theme, will use a shorter recall of it. And then P's theme and little girl's theme. All right, we'll try to layer the two. So this one, we've got the same. So I'll just do a little same. Girl's theme, chords plus motif. And which moment was this? This was the door opens, piñata freezes. Chords plus melody plus bass line. We won't do a counter melody for this one. This is going to have to come back down a little bit. Then here it will be melody plus chords plus motif plus bass line, right? So we'll add everything together. The style, sound palettes, we're going to say primary sound palette, secondary, and then the rest of these are all secondary. Remember, the primary being mostly my folk kind of music, my mariachi instruments, and then everything else being kind of a combination between the mariachi and the orchestra to kind of create everything. And with that, I now have a map of the entire scene. All right, so once I go through and have done this for every single scene, I can use this information to tempo map the scene, which is what we will be learning in the next lesson. We will learn how to score an actual scene using everything we have so far. Our spotting notes, our thematic sketches, our sound palette design. We're going to learn how to basically start out by just sketching using the piano. Basically figure out the timings. How many measures do I have before the first hit point? Does the tempo change anywhere? Does the time signature have to change for me to match these hit points? All these kind of cool things. We'll learn how to figure out what tempo the scene needs, and then we'll sketch the music to follow this structure, using the piñatas theme, then the little girl's theme, then the piñatas theme again, and then combining the two to create the cue for this scene. All right, so let's see here. Let's go through any questions. Last couple minutes of questions. I can hear someone walking around in the house upstairs. Looks like I've got my next appointment here. So let me know. Questions, I'll stay for a couple minutes, and then I'll have to sign off. So, Matt Lewis, the Hit the Road jacket. Oh, yeah, there we go. Annabelle, thank you, my pleasure. Matt Lewis, she definitely hums the Game Maker's theme from your play. Huh. I'll have to go back and listen to that. Let's do that. So for those of you who don't know, I just recently got done scoring a play in New York. That was a lot of fun. And the music, some of the music, can be heard on my YouTube channel. I had a really fun, jazzy kind of theme for the main villain called the Game Maker's theme. That does sound like it. That's Yep, that sounds like the earlier draft of it. It really does. That's funny. Good catch, Matt. Oh man, nice. Someone's listening to my music. Let's see. Annabella Galamati. That's really neat. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's cool. Yeah, I think we'll call it. It's like an hour and a half on the dot. Maybe give or take a couple minutes. As a quick reminder, you can find all these notes below for free, downloadable. Everything is included in it. Homework assignment before our next lesson, which will be next week on Tuesday, same time. Create a list of the different sound palettes you need to bring your film to life, all right? Then go through the film, whichever one you're doing, and spot it. Figure out the notes for every single scene in the film, all right? These will be very, very important for scoring. Then, finally, if you haven't signed up for the competition yet, but you'd still like to, even if you just want to get access to the films, go ahead, sign up on the Indie Film Music Contest Competitions website. Use code TABLETOP to get 10% off your subscription or your registration. If you want to show your support for the channel, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this anywhere else that people find it useful. These 3 things are super important for the algorithm and do tremendously to help. All right, YouTube loves to see that people are engaging with the video. They want to see how many people see a video and then react to it, because that means they want to push it to more people. They want to see how many people subscribe to a channel, because that means that this channel wants to be pushed. More people need to see it. And then the third one is a little bit more obscure, but the more times you actually share a link of a YouTube video, the more it builds something that we'll call like legitimacy. All right, YouTube and Google decide, oh, this link is being shared a lot. It must be really good at what it claims to be about. And so next time anyone looks up film scoring, they'll find this video kind of thing. They'll push it because saying, oh, this is a legitimate source. And yeah, don't forget to leave a comment. Let me know what you're hoping that we're still going to cover in this series. I'm having a lot of fun so far. I hope you are too. So check out my website, code IFMC, to get access to a 15% off anything on my bookstore, your total order. Let's see. Annabelle says, thank you so much. This was so helpful. Awesome. I am so glad it is. All right. I'll see you all in the next stream. All right. Keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music, my friends. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.